Pokemon is, at the end of the day, a numbers game, and the stats of Pokemon end up being one of the most important things about how they perform in a game. This is even more true in early generations before the inclusions of abilities and other mechanics that made stats less immediately important. Today we're going to go over Pokemon with the absolute highest base stats in Generation 1, and talk about why those stats made them great, or occasionally weren't enough to save them. And starting us off at number 10, we have Arcanine, with a base stat total of 455. Arcanine is a pure fire type with a pretty average bulk, having a slightly above average HP stat of 90 and a perfectly acceptable 80 in bulk defense. Arcanine's attack and speed stats, however, are exceptional, with a great 95 speed and an amazing 110 physical attack. All of this together makes Arcanine seem like a very solid Pokemon with good damage output, speed, and ability to withstand non-super effective hits pretty well. Unfortunately, Arcanine has a few things going against it that make its stats far less useful than they might seem. Arcanine is a physically attacking fire type, and before Generation 4 and the introduction of the physical special split, all fire type attacks are special attacks. So they use its much worse special attack rather than its amazing physical. Now, you could just not use fire type attacks, but not only are you giving up good coverage if you make that decision, you also give up stab, or same type attack boost to increase your damage. The result is that in Generation 1, you have to run Arcanine as a mixed attacker whose damage is far less than you'd like on either end. Even worse is the fact that Arcanine's move pool in Generation 1 isn't all that impressive. While you do get a lot of the best moves in Fire Blast, Flamethrower, Body Slam, and Hyper Beam, your coverage attacks are severely lacking. No Earthquake, Rock Slide, or Thunderbolt means that you have nothing that could help you cover your water or rock weaknesses. Arcanine's move pools get steadily better as the generations chug on, but like most Gen 1 Pokemon, you're pretty low on options. All of this makes Arcanine very weak to the likes of Rhydon and Golem in higher tiers of play, as they can threaten big damage on Arcanine without it having access to even a neutral attack to fire back with. This weakness pushes Arcanine all the way down into the PU tier on Smog, the second lowest tier of competitive play, which is pretty abysmal for a Pokemon with the 10th highest base stat total in the game. For what it's worth, Arcanine is the best Pokemon in PU, and essentially every team needing to account for exactly it and having to plan for it, and it's of course more than usable in a playthrough, and extremely easy to obtain as you can buy a Firestone on Route 1, where Growlithe is also obtained. However, this really does go to show stats aren't quite everything when it comes to being a strong Pokemon. And at number 9, we have Exeggutor, with a base stat total of 455. This means it's technically tied with Arcanine, but thankfully we have an easy way of breaking these ties. Thanks to Gen 1 weirdness, the special attack and special defense stats were just one stat. So even though they both have the same base stat totals, Exeggutor has a higher effective base stat total, thanks to have an amazing special stat of 125. And this is how we'll be breaking all ties in the future, for the record. Anyway, Exeggutor has way above average HP and okay defense of 95 and 85 respectively, which combined with their great special makes them fairly bulky. A solid attack of 95 means that any physical coverage move it's going for will hit decently hard. The only downside of Exeggutor's stats are its low speed of 55, which allows mostly anything to outspeed it. Combining this with the powerful move Psychic, access to Explosion, and Sleep Powder to induce the second most broken status in the game, Exeggutor is a menace in the overused tier. Now, Exeggutor was famously one of the best Pokemon in the tier, but over time it's fallen slightly out of favor in lieu of better options. Still, it's more than viable in the tier, showing off the power of its stat spread and move pool. It is, unfortunately, a bit difficult to use in playthroughs thanks to only being available in the Savari Zone, which is both quite a bit into the game and just generally a pain to catch anything in Generation 1. Of course, its power more than makes it worth it, being able to sleep and sweep a huge amount of the game as long as it can survive the opposing Pokemon's hit for a turn or two. Now, Exeggutor does have a 4 times weakness, however, it is to the bug type, which is so unusable in Generation 1 that the strongest bug type move is Pin Missile from the electric type Jolteon, which doesn't one-hit KO. Don't let the tree's recent fall from grace fool you. Exeggutor is still a very powerful Pokemon in Generation 1, and that's not changing anytime soon. And at number 8, we have Cloyster. This is a water/ice type with a base stat total of 480. Hilariously, almost all of that is spent on its massive 180 defensive stat, and while it has 50 HP, it still takes physical hits really well. Its special is decent at 85, giving it below average special bulk, while letting it deal okay damage, and it has a high attack stat of 95. Its slightly poor speed of 70 rounds out a very uneven and strange stat spread. While it can be awkward to use, there are a lot of situations where Cloyster can shine. Any Pokemon without a super effective physical move and low special is easily overcome with a few blizzards off of its respectable special stat. The main thing Cloyster has going for it is its move Clamp, a partial trapping move. In Gen 1, partial trapping moves worked very differently, not only stopping your opponent from switching out, but also stopping them from attacking altogether. However, rather than just being used once and staying active in the background, you instead get stuck into using this move for 2 to 5 turns. This will allow you to get a lot of damage off as long as you don't miss, and at any point you can use this ability to get a free switch on your immobile opponent. While not really worth it in playthroughs, this is extremely powerful and competitive, and Cloyster is the only Pokemon in the game that has access to Clamp specifically, giving it the only water-type partial trapping move. This allows Cloyster to easily bully any slower or paralyzed Pokemon and deal a ton of damage to set up for an easy KO. Having this utility on a Pokemon with, overall, good stats and typing is a huge help. The main thing going against Cloyster is that, at least in playthroughs, it can be hard to come by. It does require having the Super Rod or Surf in order to obtain the Pokemon, so it is quite a late game encounter. Still, once you do get a hold of your Cloyster, it can do a lot of work. And at number 7, we have Gyarados, with a base stat total of 480, tied with Cloyster. Of course, it has the higher special stat of 100, beating out Cloyster's special stat of 85 by a bit. Gyarados' water/flying type is a double-edged sword, giving it a ground immunity and canceling out one of water's only 2 weaknesses, grass, along with a flying resistance to top it all off. All of these upsides are balanced out by Gyarados' tragic 4 times weakness to electric. And while it does have an okay defense spread at 95 HP, 79 defense, and 100 special, taking quadruple damage from an attack is hard to get around. Of course, its defenses aren't the main attraction here. Gyarados has an offensive spread, with a respectable 81 speed combined with a massive 125 and 100 attack and special stats, allowing it to hit for massive damage with a wide variety of moves. Now, while Gyarados' move pool wasn't quite as good as you may have liked, as it lacks any flying moves at all, to make use of that stab bonus, it does have great coverage, with Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Blizzard, Fire Blast, and Thunderbolt, letting it hit a ton of Pokemon for super effective off of its great attacking stats. Even better is the fact that Gyarados can be obtained extremely early on in playthroughs. All you have to do is buy a Magikarp from a certain crafty salesman, or get the old rod in Vermilion City, and you can start grinding it up to level 20, where it will then evolve into one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. Yes, Magikarp can't attack, so you will have to switch train it, but that's a small price to pay for a strong Pokemon. In competitive, Gyarados falls into the underused tier, right below the OU main tier. Its weaknesses are really bad in OU, as random electric moves and odd rock slides can really punish Gyarados' switch-ins, and shows the weakness of its considerably decent bulk. Still, its unique typing and huge offensive stats means that Gyarados is never really out of contention in the format. And at number 6, we have Articuno, with a base stat total of 485. Articuno is, of course, a flying ice-type Pokemon with a well-rounded stat spread of 90 HP, 100 defense, and 125 special, which gives it good bulk, and its 85 speed, that means it's not exactly a sitting duck. While its attack isn't great, you still mostly will be relying on your special for damage, so that's not a big deal. What is a big deal is Articuno's terrible typing. It's weak to both fire and electric, and has a terrible 4 times weakness to rock, meaning that its bulk is deceptively easy to exploit. Now, while it may not be great at taking hits, if Articuno can outspeed and nuke your opponent with a Blizzard, that's not that big a deal. Rock-type damage is also pretty rare in Gen 1, and most Pokemon have it are also ground-type and slow enough that Articuno can actually outspeed and one-hit KO a lot of rock-types that theoretically could threaten it. Articuno is actually a bit of a glass cannon, doing huge damage, but often taking chunks in return. In fact, Articuno's Blizzard is one of the strongest attacks in the game outside of Explosion. It does take quite a while to actually get it in a playthrough, but for that kind of power, it's pretty reasonable. Still, being a bit slow does hold the Pokemon back in competitive. Currently, Articuno is on the underused ban list. It wasn't good enough for overuse, but had to get banned from underused tier because it was way too strong there. Articuno also can't do anything against Pokemon that resist ice, as it doesn't have any coverage at all. As a result, in OU, Articuno is often passed up in favor of other ice types, like Cloyster, who has access to slightly better move pools in a few key areas. While not having quite the presence in OU that its legendary status would imply, Articuno's raw power means that it can't be completely forgotten in competitive. And at number 5, we have Zapdos, with a base stat total of 490. This is a flying electric type with a huge 100 speed and 125 special, allowing it to zap off fast and powerful electric type attacks. Its decent bulk is rounded out by a 90 base HP, 85 defense, topped off with an above average 90 base attack. Its typing is also amazing, giving it great ground immunity and only 2 weaknesses to rock and ice, both of which are more than manageable. Zapdos's twin stab with Thunderbolt and Drill Peck can clean up a huge percentage of the game, and a lot of Pokemon in the OU format. Again, it does take a while to be obtainable, but technically Zapdos's home in the power plant is the easiest to access of the legendary birds, which is convenient because it's easily the best of the bunch. The combination of its actually good typing with its high special and speed are just far better than what the other two can offer. Zapdos is easily the best electric type in the game, and while it doesn't have too many great matchups by the time you get it, it can be great against a huge amount of Pokemon in the Pokemon League. This power also translates to OU, where Zapdos is the electric type of the format. In the competitive scene, Zapdos is mostly used as a late game sweeper, as it trades blows with the various Pokemon and spreads paralysis via Thunder Wave until you eliminate every threat to your Zapdos' health. At that point, you come in and set up agility, then it's open season for Zapdos to clean up the game. All around, Zapdos is one of the most powerful Pokemon in Gen 1. An amazing typing and stat spread combined to make Zapdos an efficient threat that's more than worth the work to get a hold of it. And at number 4, we have Moltres, with a base stat total of 495. While the Fire Flying type has the highest stat total of all the legendary birds, it's the worst of the 3 by far. It has the same HP and special as the other 2 birds at 90 and 125 respectively, though its speed stat sits between the other 2 at 90. It has a medium defense at 90 and a solid attack of 100. Giving Moltres a distinct high damage roll in comparison to the other 2 birds. However, this doesn't really matter all that much. Moltres' only good physical attack moves are Double Edge and Hyper Beam, both of which have their own downsides. You lack Drill Peck, the best and only usable flying stab in the game, and since your fire type attacks all use your special stat, you don't really have all that much over the other 2 birds in terms of damage. In fact, Zapdos usually outperforms Moltres in terms of damage, thanks to having better moves and higher speed. This is all without even getting to Moltres' awful typing. Its typing leaves it weak to electric and water, along with giving it a 4 times weakness to rock. And because fire didn't resist ice in Gen 1, an ice weakness to top it off. Moltres' middling bulk will be taxed a lot with its 5 weaknesses, making it take double damage in a lot of matchups. All of this lands Moltres in the NU tier of Smog, which stands for Never Used, right below the Underused tier. Even in this lower tier, Moltres is still outshined by Charizard, as Charizard is a huge meta threat thanks to its far better move pool. Though if you do want to use a Fire Flying type in a higher tier, Moltres has the most powerful Fire Blast in the game, so it still maintains a niche role in some formats despite its flaws. Even in playthroughs, the better move pool and the fact that it's a starter means that Charizard is often the better choice over Moltres if you happen to start off with a little lizard. Otherwise, you could use Moltres if you want a Fire Flying type, but honestly, you're probably not going to because it still has to compete with the other legendary birds for the flying spot on the team. All of this together makes Moltres a bit of a disappointment compared to its 2 lower statted cousins. And at number 3, we have Dragonite, with a base stat total of 500. This Dragon Flying type has a massive 134 attack and 100 special, combined with a medium 80 speed. Its bulk is only okay in comparison with its other defensive stats, hanging around 90. Which with Dragonite's decent typing mostly makes it quite bulky. However, the double weakness to ice once again leaves Dragonite with a very exploitable weakness. Thankfully, its only other weaknesses are Rock and Dragon. In Generation 1, the only Dragon move was Dragon Rage, which did a set damage of 40, so you're only looking out for 2 weaknesses in total. On top of this, Dragonite has access to a great move pool if you're willing to feed it some TMs in a playthrough. This means that, with just a bit of work, you can build your Dragonite to beat just about any Pokemon you want, including other Dragonites with a combination of Agility and Ice Beam. Now, Dragonite actually has a very interesting history on the competitive side of things. Dragonite was a very powerful Pokemon in the Gen 1 UU tier thanks to the combination of Agility and Wrap, another partial trapping move. Any partial trapping move can be scary, but there's usually some inherent counterplays, as if you can outspeed your opponent, you can avoid getting trapped. While paralysis can stop you from outspeeding, electric types like Zapdos are immune to paralysis, allowing them to pretty consistently punish Dragonite for trying to go for a wrap sweep. Agility can completely solve this issue by doubling your speed in a single turn, essentially stopping any Pokemon from natively outspeeding you. Even the mighty Electrode with its insane 140 speed stat. Agility plus partial trapping was so good, in fact, that the community somewhat recently banned this combo from the format, which kinda sucks for Dragonite because that was the most terrifying thing it could do in a match, even if it wasn't exactly a healthy playstyle. Though, if you really want, you can still harass the in-game AI with the combo if you'd like. Now, while this does hurt Dragonite, its great stats and move pool mean that it still has something to do in the tier, as it's one of the most effective jack-of-all-trades in the game. Dragonite learns just about every good TM, and it's extremely effective at filling any role on your team. And at number 2, we have Mew, which ties Dragonite's stat line with a base stat total of 500. This is the only time there's a straight-up tie on this list, as they have the exact same special, but Mew gets the nod here for just being the better Pokemon in Gen 1. Anyway, Mew is a pure Psychic type with 100 in every single stat, which is alright, but not quite as good as you might think. There are tons of Pokemon with more specialized stat spreads that can deal more damage, take hits better, or just outspeed Mew with ease. While this stat spread means that Mew isn't bad at anything, it's not necessarily the best at anything either due to these stats. What makes Mew a very powerful Pokemon is the fact that it learns basically every single move in the game thanks to being able to learn all TMs. Yes, there are a lot of Mews can't learn, but most of the best moves in the game are found through TMs. All of the best attacks like Earthquake and Blizzard, and powerful setup moves like Swords Dance are all TMs, allowing Mew to do almost anything you want. Now, being so reliant on TMs would normally be a weakness in playthroughs, but that's not really an issue here because Mew isn't exactly being used on a normal playthrough. You can't obtain Mew in a game without doing one of Gen 1's numerous glitches, which most people wouldn't be using on a normal playthrough. So there's really not that much to talk about in terms of in-game usage. In competitive, Mew is confirmed to be Uber's tier, the highest tier in Smog outside of weird corner cases. In Ubers, Mew is a very powerful Pokemon that's mainly used to set up with Swords Dance and then sweep your opponent's team. It's one of the few Pokemon with reliable recovery in the game thanks to Soft Boiled as well, allowing it to set up and heal any damage it takes to continue the sweep. All of this makes Mew an incredibly dangerous threat in the tier, and something that basically every team needs to have. Of course, you can't talk about Mew without also talking about the most absolutely broken Pokemon in Generation 1. And all the way at number 1, we have Mewtwo, with a base stat total of 590. A base stat total that would be considered high even without accounting for the fact that there were only 5 stats in Generation 1. This pure Psychic type has no bad stats, with its lowest being an above average 90 defense. Combine this with 106 base HP, a titanic 154 base special, and you have a Pokemon that's incredibly bulky. It's also fast with 130 speed, and even its physical attack is good with a solid 110. The absolute jump in power from Mewtwo to any other Pokemon in the game is frankly absurd. As a Psychic type, Mewtwo has effectively no weakness, as Dark didn't exist yet. Bug was completely useless, and Ghost was glitched and also terrible. This just makes Mewtwo one of the most terrifying Pokemon in any game. But it gets even worse thanks to Mewtwo's great move pool. It learns most of the best special attacks in the game and has reliable recovery and recover to help out its already great bulk. This isn't where its absurd power ends, however, as Mewtwo has access to both Amnesia and Barrier to buff its defenses and special stats. Remember, in Gen 1, Special was one stat, so Amnesia was effectively 2 Calm Minds in a single turn, which was absurd on Pokemon like Slowbro who weren't anywhere near as strong out the gate as Mewtwo is. This makes trying to break through Mewtwo's defenses difficult on its own, but Barrier and Recover allow it to patch up its lower defense stat and heal up even through some lucky crits. All of this together makes Mewtwo maybe the most absurd Pokemon ever put into a game in the context in which it was released. It was so much more powerful than anything else that you can't really simply build a team in Ubers without Mewtwo on it. There's not a single Pokemon that can even reliably check a Mewtwo in Gen 1. Remember, a check is a Pokemon that, unlike a counter, can't be switched into a Pokemon and beat it, but has to be on the Pokemon without a switch turn to beat it. Not only is there no Pokemon you can switch into to force Mewtwo out, but even if you can get a Pokemon in for free, Mewtwo still probably beats anything you bring in to try and stop it with a specific move from its massive arsenal. Mewtwo's power in Generation 1 is almost comical. There's a reason they locked this thing to the post-game, because otherwise you would just catch it and use it to beat literally every single battle without needing to click a second attack.